joining us. I'm Chloe Lee, and also in the call today we've got my co-pupil Gemma Carr.
Hello.
And today's webinar is about contact during quarantine and what can be done. In this session we're going to cover legal principles, what duties remain in place for the local authorities, any changes to the local authority duties, government guidance, the importance of accessing contact arrangements for families and assessing them on a case-by-case basis, digital contact, which I'm sure you're all too familiar with, and then finally what local authorities can do in preparation for post-lockdown. And there's just some housekeeping before we get started. It'd be great if you could all keep yourselves on mute during the webinar, but feel free to ask any questions in the chat function, and then myself or Gemma can respond to as many as we can, either throughout the webinar using the chat, or we'll answer them at the end. Presentation will take around 25 minutes, so you can all go and get some lunch afterwards. And I'm going to pass over to Gemma now to take you through the legal principles.
Thanks, Chloe. Chloe, I think the PowerPoint is still on.
Oh, one moment. If you just begin and I'll change it as soon as I can.
Okay, so the key principle when we're making decisions, or when rather you guys are making decisions around contact, is the welfare of the child. And I'm sure you're all familiar with that, and that's been in the forefront of your mind when you make these decisions long before coronavirus contact decisions had to be made. The local authorities' duties are... Oh, the PowerPoint's just coming on now, sorry.
Sorry, Gemma, has that come back up?
Yeah, it's still on the key principle point. If we could just move to the next one. Yeah, there we go. So you'll see on the screen there, they're the three main duties that the local authority have surrounding contact, and these all remain the same. So I'll just briefly go through them. I'm sure you're all familiar with them yourselves. Paragraph 15, subsection 1 of Schedule 2 of the Children Act gives the duty that the local authority should promote contact. In fact, they must promote contact unless it's not reasonable, practicable, or consistent with the child's welfare. And that remains the same now. Section 34 of the Children Act imposes a stronger duty whereby the local authority must promote reasonable contact with the child's parents, so anyone that has parental responsibility for the child, and the other requirements are set out in the Act, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And then Section 34(1) of the Children Act also sets out other forms that contact can take place. This can be through letters, cards, photographs, starting from them to even going on to overnight stays. This shows the diverse range that contact can take form. So for parents, there must be some level of contact offered by the local authority for children that are subject to interim care orders or interim supervision orders. The local authority aren't able to stop this contact without an order for the court unless this is only for a time of 7 days. So moving on to what's changed regarding those duties. In short, not a lot. The new Coronavirus Act of 2020 doesn't amend any of those sections or paragraphs, so those duties remain the same. What's important to know is how they can be applied given the new social distance guidance that's been put by the government, and Chloe's going to address you on that.
As I'm sure you're all well aware, the Prime Minister made some announcements on the 28th of May. This updated the government guidance on social interaction. So from the 1st of June, groups of up to 6 people were able to meet outdoors, including in gardens and other outdoor spaces, provided that the strict social distancing guidelines were still followed. And in addition to that, primary schools welcome back children into reception year 1 and year 6. We had high street shops reopening, outdoor markets, car showrooms, you name it, really, they opened them all, provided they met COVID-19 safety guidelines. In addition, the government are planning on opening secondary schools and sixth forms from the 15th of June to provide face-to-face contact time for year 10s and 12s. And the government also intend to open other non-essential retail. Now, moving on specifically to what applies to local authorities, we're looking at the current government guidance for children's social care services. Now, this was last updated on the 6th of May, so it's yet to be updated following the Prime Minister's announcement. Basically, what this guidance says, it was released in April 2020, early April, and they said, we expect that contact between children in care and their birth relatives will continue, and that it's essential for children and families to remain in touch at this difficult time. And for some children, the consequences of not seeing relatives will be traumatising. Now, the guidance goes on to outline that all contact arrangements should be assessed on a case-by-case basis, taking into account a range of factors, as I've just said, including the current social distancing guidelines and the needs of the child. And Gemma will talk about this in more detail later on. But the document also goes on to explain that the usual face-to-face guidance may not be possible or appropriate at this time, and that contact will likely need to take place virtually until further relaxations are announced. And we know there have been these further relaxations. This is something that all local authorities have already taken on board, and is generally the way contact is tending to take place at the moment. However, the government has made clear that their expectation of local authorities is for you to maintain the levels of contact as directed by the court, and that's for each case within proceedings. And then that falls onto the social workers, who are to determine how best to support these family interactions, and of course that's again based on the circumstances of each case. What's important is that the onus is still on the local authority, and it's for local authorities to be making these difficult decisions and to be identifying arrangements that ensure this contact is still taking place and it's still ongoing. But alongside that, local authorities have to ensure they're still complying with government advice, especially on social distancing. And this is the same as it always has been. Just to reiterate the point Gemma made, this position has not been altered in any way by the COVID-19 government guidance. And the local authorities' duties remain the same in respect of contact. However, the difficulty now for local authorities is they have to carefully balance their competing duties, both to safeguard and promote the welfare of the children, but also to promote contact between the children and the parents or the carers, or those with parental responsibility. And obviously this includes promoting the health, the welfare of the children, in particular the health during this crisis. Now, as I said, the guidance hasn't been updated, but I have put a link on the slide, and the government guidance is being reviewed at the moment. So any day now there could be further guidance in relation to this. And if you followed the link, and we'll share the slides afterwards, then you'll be able to find the guidance there. I'm going to hand back over to my colleague Gemma now.
Thanks, Chloe. So as Chloe said, we have had some updates in regards to social distancing rules, and now you can go and visit people at 2 meters distance from 6 different households. Also, families have always been allowed to allow children to visit a different household where their parent resides, and this is one of the exceptional circumstances where the social distancing rules will not be broken in that case. So in order to decide, for the local authorities to decide how contact should go ahead, it's really important to look at each case on an individual basis, because each child and each family are going to have different needs and different health conditions which might become important. So for the first example is, if a child is living with a foster carer who is in one of the at-risk categories of this virus, it wouldn't be appropriate to allow that child to have contact with a family member if it puts the foster carer at risk of suffering from the virus. In order to establish this, conversations need to be had on a regular basis between the social workers, the children's foster carers, the children's family. Equally, if the child has got health conditions and needs to self-isolate, or also the child's parents or the person wanting the contact, they may also need to be self-isolating. So these considerations need to be taken into account as to whether it's actually safe to have face-to-face contact at this time. Secondly, the welfare of the child. Each case, the child is going to have different needs. The child may, depending on ages, I know for most of the cases I've been involved in, contact has now been going to telephone or video calls for the most part, and this can work well for some children. Others it might not be working so well, particularly for younger children. They may not understand why they've not been able to see their parents in such a considerable amount of time, and they may be the children that are more at need of having this face-to-face contact. So again, it's on a case-by-case basis on what the welfare of the child needs and how contact has been going so far to determine how it should progress at this stage when restrictions are being lowered to an extent. Also, contact in the home is an option. I've seen this happen in cases, for example, where the children are under an interim care order with a family member, and that family member has quite a close relationship with the child's parents. Also, they live in quite close proximity, so they're able to walk over. This could be an ideal situation where if the family member with the interim care order can supervise the contact at the home, and they feel comfortable doing this, and as long as the local authority are comfortable that this is suitable, those arrangements can be made, and I know they have been made in some cases, so that's something to consider. Equally, whether the social worker themselves feel confident or comfortable with going into a family home to supervise contact. Obviously, that's decisions that you yourselves are going to have to make. Nobody is going to expect anyone to put themselves in a position where they feel they're at risk or they're not comfortable with. So it is going to have to come from you, and you're going to have to make your own decisions on what's suitable for each case. Also, contact in the community. This can now start taking place, such as in open spaces, parks, fields, wherever you can go and meet outside. This could happen now. You can meet up to 6 people from different households. So it could be a case where a social worker can go and supervise this contact in an outdoor space. I know now there's been a bit of a dip in the weather recently, so it might not be suitable for a couple of weeks. But again, it's just something to be considering whether it's suitable for each case. So the overriding theme here is really, you've got to be creative and flexible with new ideas on contact. These are completely new, unprecedented times. So it's acceptable to come up with new ideas, things that have never been tried before. But if you think it will work for that family and the social worker is happy it will work for themselves, and if risk assessments have been taken and such as the like, then this can go ahead. So be open to suggestions from family members, foster carers, your colleagues, have these conversations between yourselves, and we can be creative with how contact can go forward, because it's really important that children do have this contact and that parents can have this contact as well. So some flexibility and sensible judgment from the social workers is needed to ensure this happens. Moving on to digital contacts. I know certainly in most of the cases I've been on, and most of the cases my colleagues have been on, this has been the substitution. Contact is now, for the most part, I think, has gone to all being done by telephone or video calls. So this is going to continue. What's really important for this contact to be successful is to ensure that the parents are aware with what platform is proposed. Is this going to be Skype, Zoom, FaceTime? And also that they're aware on how to use it. So don't just assume parents have this knowledge. I'm sure all of you are very tech savvy and know how to use it, because we use this technology for our jobs every day, but parents might not be the same. So it's really important these conversations are had so everybody is aware how to work these systems before it's put into place. It's also important to set times and dates so that carers and children, the foster carers, the family having the contact, so all know when it's going to take place and for how long. There's some cases where, for example, if the child is with a family member and the parents have, like before, a very strong connection with that family member, it might be reasonable that contact just happens as and when. They may have regular phone calls with the carer of the child, and it might be that during these phone calls they speak to the child. It could be they speak to them multiple times a day in some cases, if that's suitable, and of course that can continue during these times. However, if the case is not like that, if the carers don't have a relationship with the family members, or if they're foster carers, it wouldn't be right to expect them to not know when these calls are going to take place and be available at all times. So it's really important this is set out and everyone can agree an appropriate time. Equally, it's quite difficult for especially young children to be expected to sit on the phone or sit on a video call for an hour 3 times a week. Obviously they get distracted. So people need to have their expectations be realistic as to how long this contact could take place. One thing I would suggest is perhaps having a maximum amount of time for this telephone call or video call, so that parents aren't disappointed if, say, they've been on the phone for an hour and the foster carer says, it's got to end now. They don't have to have those awkward conversations, because it's already been set out that it shouldn't take place no longer than X amount of time. However, I don't think having a minimum amount of time is appropriate, because children do get distracted and it's difficult for foster carers to keep them on a phone or on a laptop and things like that. So I think everyone's expectations need to be realistic at the outset. Another way that contact can take place, not face-to-face, is through letters and gifts and photographs. And again, I think parents need to be made aware by the social workers what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and put this option to them that this is another form of contact that they can engage in.
Thanks, Gemma. So moving then on to what to do post-lockdown and how local authorities can prepare for this. Whilst it's important for local authorities to understand their duties and responsibilities, especially during this time when things are changing so rapidly and the government guidance is being updated all the time, there's a need for local authorities to look to the future and begin preparing. It's unlikely that local authorities will simply be able to revert back to, I guess, business as usual and resume everything they were doing before and resume direct contact as it once was. Local authorities, as Gemma said, need to continue to use digital contact and will have to in many circumstances. And whilst this shouldn't replace face-to-face contact in the future, it can still have a strong place amongst a package of other services. And whilst this virtual contact has been beneficial, Gemma's spoken about the ways and the drawbacks that it's created, and that many families can't use technology and will be eager to be reunited face-to-face after all this time. Therefore, in light of these recent relaxations, however small they may be, it's now the time for local authorities to begin thinking about how and when this direct contact should resume for children in care. Gemma's gave examples, contact in the community, but there need to be different considerations, again, for contact in the home, contact in children's centres when they begin to reopen. And it is also likely that as local authorities, the onus is on you to prioritise cases, and it's these cases where reduced contact has had the greatest impact on the welfare of the children. Again, it's really important to look at the risk factors Gemma's mentioned to ensure these are balanced against the best interest of the child when coming to any decision, and making all the contacts as safe as possible. This may be to ensure there's appropriate PPE available for social workers in order for them to supervise contact. And travelling has to be another consideration. In order to reduce risk, it may be best if social workers can travel in their own cars to supervise contact. However, we all know this is not always possible, and there are some measures in place to protect people using public transport. The same will apply to families who may need to travel to have contact in the community with their children. They'll have the same risks if they're travelling on public transport and being out in the community itself. Something that I'm sure many of you are incredibly worried about already is the increased level of work. Local authorities are already snowed under, and they're battling with increased workloads constantly and the pressures that come with that. And we are now being informed that domestic and child abuse are rising during lockdown. So undoubtedly when lockdown is lifted, workloads will only increase more than they already are. So as things slowly begin to move towards a more normal life again post-COVID-19, local authorities need to look at how they can prepare for this increased workload. Firstly, staffing levels are key. If they remain the same, it's likely these will lead to unmanageable caseloads. So it is time for local authorities to consider whether recruitment is necessary and what level and scale that can be at. Another key consideration may be ensuring staff are sufficiently trained to deal with the work that's coming in. So we've got new staff, they need to be trained before they're given a massive caseload, because it'll just get on top of them. And whilst all this is being said, we really do understand that funding may simply not be available for increased staff and extra training, but it's just a consideration that the local authorities may want to think about. And really my final thoughts is it's simply not plausible to resume direct contact in all cases as these restrictions relax. And it's important, as we've both outlined, that cases are prioritised. They're looked at on a case-by-case basis. Because as we know, virtual contact does ease time pressure on all involved. And therefore, it's important that does continue in some capacity. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. That is the end of the webinar. However, we have got a little bit of time to answer some questions. So if you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, and yeah, we can take them from there.
Hi. Can you hear me?
I can. Hello.
Hi. I just got one question about the clarity around the transporting. Is there a bit more of an expectation about like foster carers or other carers transporting the children to contact to reduce the increased contact the children are coming into other people?
Do you mean the foster carers driving the children to contact?
Yeah.
I would say I don't think there's an expectation that foster carers have to do this. I think it'd be useful if you could have conversations with the foster carer if they're willing to do this, rather than being, you know.
Expectation was not a word, probably the right word. It was just, is that something maybe through this training that could be encouraged to be explored?
Yes, I think it should be encouraged to, if you can come up with a practical arrangement, say we can meet at this place and the children can have contact with the parents. However, it would require the foster carers to drive the children there. I think the conversation should be had with the foster carers and see what their opinion is on that and whether they're willing to assist.
Okay. All right, thanks.
We have had a question come through on the group chat, which is there a legal duty to promote sibling contact within the law, and how can siblings challenge when contact is not being promoted? I can take that, Gemma, if you would like me to.
Oh, I was trying to find the chat. I can't see any questions on mine.
It's come through to me privately. Contact, as you'll all be aware, contact between children, parents and siblings is only permitted if it's agreed by the court, but there is a duty to promote that when there's a court order in place, and that should still be taking place at the moment. It's simply not good enough for social workers to not come up with innovative ideas in order to promote this contact, especially given that virtual contact is being used so widely at the moment. The difficulty comes in when children are extremely young. So we've got babies and toddlers who simply are unable to focus to sit on a screen, or they're just too young to communicate in that way. But other ways of communication is available, so sending drawings, letters, and with the children colouring in to one another. There's many ways that contact can take place, which is different to direct contact. However, as relaxations, as the art begin to be more relaxations, it should be these types of cases where siblings haven't seen each other for a long time, where direct contact should really become a priority. And it's thinking of ways that can be done safely, which in the best interest of all the children involved.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, Chloe, whatever arrangement was in place in cases before the lockdown with contact, I think the local authority should try and mirror that now. So if there was sibling contact on a frequent basis before the lockdown, the local authority should try and mirror that with the indirect contact. So FaceTime calls, video calls, and the things that Chloe suggested. I've had a question, Chloe, that's come, I think, direct to me. Could you tell us a bit about where we stand with overnight contact, please? I think with overnight contact, if that was something that was ordered before the lockdown, is something that is safe to go ahead. My understanding is if that's with a parent, that can still take place as long as nobody involved with looking after the child has got a health condition and nobody is opposing to that. Children can go and visit parents in another household, and they can go and stay overnight with a parent in another household. I hope that answers that question.
And there's been a few more. So I've had one that says video calls, as discussed, can be shorter than direct due to children being unable to engage as long. Where do we stand on parents requesting for extended contact in the future to make up for this time lost? I think we did touch on this in the presentation about virtual contact can be as and when. So if children are struggling to engage for as long, social workers could think about having multiple virtual calls So sessions on Zoom or Skype, maybe if the child can't sit for 30 minutes at a time, that can be split into 3 10-minute sessions. Obviously, parents want to see the children and the carers and those with parental responsibility. So it's difficult to say, oh, you've had 10 minutes, that's your contact. I think it's important that everyone is flexible at this time and ensure that parents and carers are getting the time they need and that vital contact time, even if it's remote. Otherwise, you may have parents in the future challenging that they need extra contact time. We just have one comment. It's not a question, but just regarding foster carers transporting, saying it's tricky because some foster carers are shielding, but also have other children in placements who are not in school, so they can't transport as doing homeschool. Yeah, and every case is different, and every social worker will have their own risks and different families with different risks, and that's why it's so important things are looked at on a case-by-case basis.
And we've got a question. Hi, where does the local authority stand if parents challenge the lack of direct contact with babies in particular? And then I think Judith Ross has said that the local authority, one local authority, I'm not sure which, is seeking health advice as to particular